type called type 2, which means that they overeat, they don't do enough exercise, all the things that with a little change in their behavior, they could solve a problem overnight that's becoming a greater and greater public health problem. At the same time, the people who were talking about its problem today were saying, well, the problem is that the FDA is too slow to approve things, et cetera, et cetera. So I went up to them afterward and I said, after you had AIDS activists who came, and there weren't 20 million people who were affected, and they got the FDA to change regulations on the way things were done so that the drugs were approved and put to use a great deal faster. Why do you think that might have been? And someone finally said to me, well, probably the issue of imminent death coming. That being the fact, I guess the question that I would ask is, what is the death experience that we have to have? You've pointed out the $10 billion shortfall. That doesn't seem to get covered. It doesn't seem to even get accepted in Albany. The New Yorker had a wonderful piece on what you had done and how you had talked about this for some time in the past. And legislators kind of shrug and they look at it. They see no incentive to change. We've had a number of people talking tonight about a variety of ways in which there are very few incentives for them to change. And the system is not very well geared to allow them to change. What is the kind of crisis that's going to happen that people will pay enough attention, that they will say, yes, it's about time, we really have to clean this up and change it?
Well, you've identified a serious problem, which I've talked about. There's no triggering event. And the only thing that might get the media's attention is running out of cash.
Yeah, when they can't,
and
like the city.
You don't want to wish for the very thing you're trying to avoid. And that's the problem. You know, in 1975, most of you are too young to remember this, but in 1975, we had no forewarning about the city fiscal crisis. One day, the presidents or chairman of the three largest banks came into Hugh Carey's office, and I was the only other person in the room, and they said we will no longer underwrite the notes and bonds of the city of New York. And that's what triggered, and that was a headline.
I'd just like to add that both New York Civic and certainly Common Good were actively working with, among others, Google, to try to build a social media and web strategy to start a movement that's an overhaul government movement, where it's take everything, rethink it, not to do what the right says, not to put deregulate, but to re-regulate so you can actually begin to make a lot of these common good type choices. So cutting here or there to begin to bring responsibility back to government. Just one footnote on obesity. The head of obesity at the Centers for Disease Control said a few years ago that we wouldn't have a crisis of obesity if children simply were allowed to do the same activities they did 30 or 40 years ago. And what's happened, in part for legal reasons, is that kids are not allowed to go out alone. They're not allowed. Broward County, Florida, actually banned running at recess. Literally, a few years ago, they had 186 claims for kids who fell down. Nothing in the playgrounds for a kid over the age of 5. No seesaws, merry-go-rounds, climbing ropes, jungle gyms, you name it. Everything, go look at the playground. It's off the limit. And the reason is because all those other things involve not just the certainty, but not just the risk, but the certainty that from time to time a kid's going to hurt himself. But taking those risks teaches the kids how to be responsible for themselves. Teaching the kids makes them athletic. It has all these incredible, not only physical, but cognitive benefits, which is the reason why the American Academy of Pediatrics and others are outraged about this. There's a new commission about restoring risk to children just came out in England 3 weeks ago. But that's another one of these legal frictions that's occurred almost without our knowing it that has these unintended